The whispered fear. The battlefield was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth. Ruined alien warships lay scattered across the red sands, their twisted frames still smoking from a recent fight. Not far away, a group of alien soldiers moved cautiously through the debris, their large reptilian eyes scanning every shadow. These were the Krolf, one of the most fearsome warrior species in the galaxy. Their scaled bodies, sharp claws, and advanced weapons had made them conquerors of countless worlds. But now, they were afraid. Their leader, Commander Kraxus, held up a clawed hand, signaling the group to stop. His voice, deep and gravelly, whispered, "Stay together. The shadow shooter is here." At the mention of the name, one of the younger soldiers let out a low growl of fear. The shadow shooter. Are the humans sending one of them here? Another soldier, older and more scared, spat on the ground. I thought it was a myth. No one can hit a target from 5 miles away. No one can hide for days without food or water. Commander Kraxus turned, his yellow eyes narrowing. Do you think the burned bodies of our scouts were a myth? Do you think the empty helmets of our best snipers were a lie? He's here, and he's watching us. The group moved forward slowly, weapons raised, their movements careful. But it didn't matter how careful they were. It was already too late. A legend in the shadows. On a rocky ledge overlooking the battlefield, a lone figure lay perfectly still. His name was Sergeant Keller, and he was human. His body blended with the terrain, his camouflaged suit making him nearly invisible. The long barrel of his sniper rifle extended through a small opening in the rocks, the lens of his scope reflecting nothing but darkness. Keller was calm. He was patient. He had been in this exact position for 2 days, waiting for the Krolf to make their move. Most soldiers couldn't handle the silence, the loneliness, or the waiting. But Keller thrived on it. Through the scope, Keller watched the group of aliens below. He could see the fear in their eyes, the way their claws trembled as they clutched their weapons. He had studied the Krolf for years. He knew how they thought, how they moved, and most importantly, how to make them afraid. Fear was Keller's greatest weapon. A shot in the dark. One of the Krolf soldiers broke away from the group, his footsteps crunching softly on the sand. He muttered something in their language, probably telling the others he was going to check the wreckage ahead. Keller tracked him through the scope, his breathing steady, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. The soldier didn't stand a chance. Keller exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The sound of the shot was barely a whisper, but the result was immediate. The alien's head snapped back, and his body crumpled to the ground. The rest of the Krolf froze. Their leader, Commander Kraxus, barked an order, and the soldiers scrambled for cover. But there was no cover. The battlefield was open, exposed. They were sitting ducks. Keller adjusted his aim, lining up his next shot. This time, he targeted the Krolf with the scared face, the one who had doubted Keller's existence. Another soft crack of the rifle, and the alien fell. Panic spread through the group. They started firing wildly into the shadows, their weapons lighting up the darkness. But they weren't shooting at anything. They didn't even know where Keller was. The fear grows. Commander Kraxus roared, trying to restore order. Hold your fire. He wants us to panic. Don't give him what he wants. But it was no use. The soldiers were terrified. They had heard the stories of the human snipers, how they could hit a target from miles away, how they could vanish into thin air, and how they never missed. Kraxus himself was starting to doubt. He had fought countless battles, faced enemies that towered over him. But this was different. This wasn't a battle. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. The final warning. Keller didn't smile as he watched the chaos unfold. He didn't feel joy or satisfaction. This was just another mission, another target. He adjusted his scope, focusing on Commander Kraxus. Through the crosshairs, Keller could see the fear in the alien's eyes. He could see the way the commander's claws gripped his weapon. his chest rising and falling as he struggled to control his breathing. Keller didn't take the shot. Not yet. Instead, he pulled out a small device from his belt. It was a sound emitter, programmed to mimic the whistling of wind. He activated it and threw it into the distance. The eerie sound echoed across the battlefield, sending the Krolth into a frenzy. They thought it was another weapon, another trick from the humans. They were right. As the aliens scattered, Keller whispered to himself, "Run. It won't help you." The silent predator. The Krolth soldiers scattered like leaves in a storm. Their sharp claws scrambled over rocks and debris as they sought cover, each one desperate to escape the invisible threat. They no longer moved as a team. Fear had broken their discipline. Commander Hraxus growled in frustration, his fangs glinting under the pale light of the shattered moon overhead. He slammed his claw into the ground, sending a spray of red dust into the air. "Cowards!" he roared. "Regroup now, or I will execute you myself." But his words fell on deaf ears. The Krolth soldiers were too consumed by panic. In the distance, hidden among the jagged rocks, Sergeant Keller watched through his scope. His breathing remained steady, his heartbeat slow. Each shot he had taken had been deliberate, calculated to create chaos. And it had worked. Keller adjusted the focus on his scope, scanning the battlefield. His voice was low as he muttered to himself, "How predictable. You can't fight what you can't see." The sniper's creed. Keller didn't think of himself as a killer, not in the traditional sense. He was a tool, a weapon that humanity used to level the playing field against larger, more advanced species. The Krolth were physically superior, technologically advanced, and confident in their dominance. But Keller had something they didn't: patience and precision. His fingers grazed the rifle's trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. A good sniper didn't waste ammunition. Each bullet had to count. Each shot had to serve a purpose. Keller's mission wasn't just to kill. It was to destroy morale, to make the Krolth fear humans. And fear was spreading like wildfire. The trap. Through his scope, Keller spotted 2 Krolth soldiers huddled behind the wreckage of a downed transport. They were whispering to each other in their guttural language, their eyes darting around nervously. Keller smiled faintly. He didn't need to understand their words to know what they were saying. They were wondering where he was, wondering if they were next. Keller reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, an automated decoy drone. It was shaped like a small insect and emitted a faint, high-pitched hum. Keller activated it and let it crawl away from his position. The drone's sound would mimic the faint movement of footsteps, drawing attention away from Keller. The 2 Krolth soldiers heard the noise. One of them growled, raising his weapon. "Did you hear that?" the other asked, his voice shaking. The sound grew closer, and the soldiers tensed. Keller watched as they stepped out from their cover, aiming their weapons toward the noise. That was their mistake. With a soft pull of the trigger, Keller fired. The first soldier dropped instantly, a clean shot through the head. The second soldier froze, his weapon trembling in his claws. Keller didn't fire again. He wanted the soldier to run. And run he did. Hraxus takes control. Commander Hraxus saw the soldier sprinting toward him, his armor clinking as he stumbled over the rough terrain. The commander grabbed the soldier by the shoulder and snarled, "Get a hold of yourself. Where is the enemy?" The soldier's eyes were wide with terror. "He's everywhere. I heard him. He's coming for us." Hraxus shoved the soldier aside, disgusted. "You're a disgrace to the Krolth. Humans are weaklings. They hide because they are cowards." But even as he said it, Hraxus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His sharp eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his claws scraping against the metal. Hraxus had heard the stories about human snipers. He had dismissed them as exaggerations, propaganda meant to intimidate. But now, standing in the middle of this silent battlefield, he wasn't so sure. The sniper strikes again. Keller adjusted his scope, locking onto Commander Hraxus. He could see the frustration in the alien's face, the way his jaw tightened as he barked orders at his remaining soldiers. Keller's finger hovered over the trigger. Taking out the commander would be easy, but it wasn't the right time. Not yet. Keller wanted the Krolf to feel the pressure, to feel hunted. Instead, he shifted his aim to a nearby rock formation. A single shot rang out, hitting the rocks and sending a shower of debris into the air. The Krolf soldiers ducked instinctively, their shouts echoing across the battlefield. Praxis spun around, his weapon raised, but there was no target to be found. Keller smirked. Keep guessing. A message left behind. As the chaos continued, Keller retrieved a small beacon from his pack. It was a device designed to transmit a simple audio message. He recorded a brief message in the Krolf language, his voice calm and steady. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. He activated the beacon and threw it into the middle of the battlefield. It beeped softly as it landed, drawing the attention of the Krolf soldiers. When one of them approached and played the message, their fear turned into sheer panic. The hunter and the hunted. The battlefield was eerily quiet again, but it was a fragile silence. Every Krolf soldier could feel it, the invisible presence of the sniper. The human's rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was a ghost, haunting their every move. Commander Praxis crouched behind a shattered piece of an alien transport, his sharp claws digging into the dirt. Around him, only a handful of his soldiers remained. Their once proud squad of 20 had been reduced to 6. The beacon's message still echoed in his mind. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Praxis clenched his jaw, trying to ignore the chill running down his spine. He wants us to be afraid, he growled to himself. But I am not afraid of a human. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A desperate plan. Praxis turned to his second-in-command, a heavily armored Krolf named Kretak. We need to flush him out. He can't shoot all of us at once. If we spread out, he'll have to reveal his position. Kretak hesitated, his clawed hand gripping his weapon tightly. Commander, with respect, spreading out makes us easier targets. He's faster than we are. He's smarter. Praxis slammed his fist against the ground. Are you suggesting we sit here and wait to die? Is that what the mighty Krolf have become? Cowards. Kretak lowered his gaze, his pride wounded. No, Commander. I'll leave the others. The remaining soldiers exchanged nervous glances, but nodded. They trusted Kretak, even if they feared the invisible sniper. Keller watches. From his perch high above the battlefield, Keller observed the Krolf soldiers as they began to spread out. He smirked. It was a predictable move, one he had seen many times before. He adjusted his rifle, his scope following Kretak as the alien moved cautiously across the terrain. The Krolf commander thought he was being clever, but Keller had been trained for this exact scenario. Patience, timing, precision. Keller steadied his breathing, his finger hovering over the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. He wanted to see how far they'd go. The ambush. Kretak signaled to the others, pointing toward a cluster of rocks that seemed like a likely hiding spot for the sniper. The soldiers moved quickly, weapons raised, their sharp eyes scanning every shadow. When they reached the rocks, Kretak barked an order. Check every corner. Don't leave a single crevice unsearched. The soldiers obeyed, their claws scraping against the stones as they tore apart the area. But there was nothing there. No sniper, no human, just rocks and dust. Then it happened. A single shot rang out, hitting one of the soldiers square in the chest. The alien's body collapsed, his weapon clattering to the ground. The others froze, their eyes darting wildly in every direction. Kretak roared. Where is he? Where is he? Another shot echoed, this time hitting the ground near Kretak's feet. It wasn't a miss. It was a warning. Psychological warfare. Kretak's chest heaved as he struggled to keep his composure. The human wasn't just killing them. He was toying with them, Each shot was calculated to create maximum fear and confusion. The soldiers were falling apart. One of them dropped his weapon and ran, his fear overwhelming him. Kretak snarled and raised his rifle, firing at the fleeing soldier. The traitor fell, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. "No one runs," Kretak growled. "No one." From his vantage point, Keller shook his head. "They're doing my job for me," he muttered. Graxis takes the lead. Back at the command post, Graxis heard the distant gunfire and knew things were falling apart. He couldn't wait any longer. If they didn't act soon, the human would pick them off one by one. Graxis activated his communicator, his voice cold and commanding. "Kretak, fall back. We'll regroup at the ridge and prepare for a counterattack." There was no response. Graxis growled and tried again. "Kretak, respond. Do you hear me?" Still nothing. Graxis' claws tightened around his weapon. Damn it. The hunter becomes the hunted. Keller watched as Graxis began to retreat, his remaining soldiers moving with him. They were trying to regroup, trying to salvage what was left of their team. Keller decided it was time to make his move. He packed up his rifle and began to relocate, moving silently across the rocky terrain. He was no longer just a sniper. Now, he was a shadow, stalking his prey. As he moved, he thought about the mission. This wasn't just about killing Kralth soldiers. It was about sending a message that would spread across the galaxy. Humans were not to be underestimated. A deadly message. Graxis and his soldiers reached the ridge, their breaths heavy, their nerves frayed. The commander turned to address his men, his voice firm. "We will not die like this. We are Kralth. We fight to the last claw." Before he could say more, a small device landed at his feet. It beeped once, then twice. Graxis' eyes widened. "Movie." The explosion was small but precise, sending a shockwave through the ridge. Graxis was thrown to the ground, his ears ringing. When he looked up, he saw Keller standing on the ridge above them, his rifle slung over his shoulder. For the first time, Graxis saw the face of the human sniper. Keller raised a hand in a mock salute, then disappeared into the shadows. The turning point. The ridge lay in ruins, smoke rising from the small but precise explosion Keller had set. Commander Graxis sat on the ground, his sharp claws digging into the dirt. His chest heaved with anger and frustration as his remaining soldiers picked themselves up. Only 3 of them were left now, their proud squad reduced to a shadow of its former strength. The human sniper had shown himself, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. Graxis had seen the cold determination in the man's eyes, a predator's gaze that promised one thing: death. The Kralth regroup. Graxis growled as he rose to his feet. His voice was a low rumble, filled with both fury and command. "He thinks he's already won. But this isn't over." One of the remaining soldiers, a younger Kralth named Dravak, hesitated before speaking. "Commander, we cannot face him like this. He's too fast, too precise. He's not fighting like a soldier, he's hunting us." Graxis turned sharply, his yellow eyes narrowing. "And you think we aren't hunters? Have you forgotten what it means to be Kralth?" Dravak lowered his gaze, ashamed. "Listen to me," Graxis continued, his voice cold. "The human has made one mistake. He thinks we are afraid. He thinks we will scatter and run. But fear can be a weapon. We will use it against him." The other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances but nodded. Graxis' authority was absolute. Keller's next move. High above the ridge, Keller adjusted his position, moving silently across the rocky terrain. He had seen the explosion scatter the Kralth, and he knew they would regroup. That was their nature. They couldn't admit defeat, not even when it was inevitable. Through his scope, Keller watched the aliens below. They were moving cautiously now, sticking close to the ridge's shadows. He smirked. Smart, but not smart enough. Keller reached into his pack and pulled out a small round device, a motion-triggered sensor. He carefully placed it on the ground, covering it with loose sand and rocks. If any of the Kralth tried to follow him, the device would alert him instantly. This was no longer a battle. It was a game of patience. The Kralth's counterattack. Raxus crouched behind a jagged rock, his claws tracing a crude map of the terrain in the dirt. He's watching us. But he can't watch everywhere at once. If we split up and close the distance, we can force him to make a mistake. Dravok frowned. Commander, splitting up will make us easier targets. That's what he wants. Raxus snarled. And staying together makes us a bigger target. The only way to beat a sniper is to get close. Do you want to sit here and wait to die? Reluctantly, Dravok nodded. Raxus pointed to the others. You, head south and circle back. You, take the east ridge. Dravok, you're with me. Move slowly, stay low, and don't give him a clean shot. The human bleeds like any other creature. We just have to make him bleed. The soldiers moved out, their movements deliberate and cautious. The first mistake. Keller watched through his scope as one of the soldiers moved toward the east ridge. The alien was careful, staying low, and using the rocks as cover. Keller admired the effort, but it wasn't enough. He steadied his aim, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The shot was perfect, striking the soldier in the neck. The alien collapsed without a sound, his weapon clattering to the ground. Keller adjusted his scope, scanning for the others. He saw movement to the south and shifted his position, keeping himself hidden in the shadows. But as he moved, a faint click caught his attention. He froze. The Kralth's trap. Dravok and Raxus had set their own device, a crude but effective noise trap made from scavenged debris. The click Keller had heard was a metal plate shifting under his foot, triggering a soft chime that echoed through the rocks. Raxus' lips curled into a savage grin. There you are. The commander signaled to Dravok, and the two moved swiftly, their weapons raised. They stayed low, using the terrain to their advantage. Raxus could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was his chance to turn the tide. Keller cursed under his breath. He had underestimated them. He shifted his position quickly, but he could hear the Kralth closing in. The close encounter. Raxus spotted a faint shadow moving between the rocks. He raised his weapon, his claws tightening on the trigger. Human, he roared, his voice echoing across the ridge. Keller didn't respond. He didn't have to. Instead, he moved further into the shadows, his rifle ready. He knew better than to engage directly. Dravok circled around, trying to flank the sniper. He could feel his adrenaline surging, his senses sharp. This was his moment to prove himself. As Dravok crept closer, he spotted a figure crouched behind a rock. Without hesitation, he fired. The shot hit, but the figure didn't move. Dravok stepped closer, realizing too late that it was a decoy, a bundle of cloth designed to mimic a human form. Before he could react, Keller emerged from the shadows, his knife flashing in the dim light. The shadows strike. Dravok's claws trembled as he realized his mistake. The human he had shot wasn't alive. It was a decoy, a carefully crafted trick. The real danger was behind him. He barely had time to turn before Keller struck. The human moved like a ghost, silent and precise. The blade in his hand gleamed under the faint light of the shattered moon as it slashed across Dravok's arm. The Kralth roared in pain, swinging his weapon wildly, but Keller was already gone, disappearing back into the shadows. Dravok's desperation. Blood seeped from the deep gash in Dravok's arm, staining his crimson armor a darker shade. He stumbled back, his breathing ragged. His eyes darted around the rocky terrain, searching for any sign of the sniper. "Commander," he shouted, his voice tinged with both pain and fear. "He's here. He's close." Raxus heard the call and snarled, baring his fangs. "Hold your ground, Dravok. Don't let him intimidate you." But deep down, even Raxus felt the weight of the situation. The human wasn't just a sniper. He was a predator, and the Kralth were his prey. Keller's calculations. From his hidden position, Keller watched Dravok stumble, clutching his wounded arm. He didn't feel satisfaction or triumph. To him, this was simply the job. The Kralth had invaded human space, attacked human colonies, and now they were paying the price. Keller's eyes flicked to his rifle. He could end Dravok with a single shot, but he hesitated. He wanted to draw Kraxus out, to force the commander into making a mistake. Keller retrieved a small flash grenade from his pack. He pulled the pin and lobbed it toward Dravok's position. The flash grenade. The grenade landed with a soft clink. Dravok's eyes widened as he recognized the sound. No. The grenade detonated with a blinding flash of light and a deafening bang. Dravok staggered, his vision blurred and his ears ringing. He fell to the ground, disoriented and vulnerable. Kraxus roared in frustration as he saw the flash from a distance. He slammed his claw into the ground, his rage boiling over. He's toying with us. The commander's remaining soldier, a burly Kralth named Torvik, stepped forward. Commander, we need to retreat. We're outmatched. Kraxus turned on Torvik, his eyes blazing. Retreat. You think running will save you? This human will hunt us down no matter where we go. Torvik flinched but said nothing. The commander's fury. Kraxus grabbed his communicator and growled into it. Human, I know you can hear me. His voice echoed across the rocky terrain. Keller, crouched behind a boulder, smirked. He adjusted his earpiece, allowing Kraxus's voice to come through clearly. You think you're clever, hiding in the shadows, picking us off one by one. But you're just a coward with a rifle. Face me, human. Let's end this. Keller didn't respond. He knew better than to be baited, but the challenge had given him valuable information. Kraxus was growing desperate, and desperate enemies made mistakes. Setting the stage, Keller moved quickly, relocating to a new vantage point. He needed to set a trap, something that would force Kraxus into the open. He spotted a narrow canyon not far from the ridge. Its rocky walls would funnel the Kralth into a confined space, giving him the advantage. He planted another motion-triggered device at the canyon's entrance, then climbed to a high ledge overlooking the area. From here, he could see everything. The Kralth advance. Kraxus signaled to Torvik and the dazed Dravok. We move now. Stay close and watch for traps. The human is playing games, but we'll show him that the Kralth are no one's prey. The three Kralth moved cautiously toward the canyon, their weapons ready. Every step was deliberate, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Dravok's breathing was shallow, and his wounded arm hung limp at his side. Torvik stayed close to him, his massive frame acting as a shield. As they approached the canyon, the motion-triggered device activated, emitting a soft, rhythmic beep. Kraxus froze. What is that? The ambush. Before the Kralth could react, Keller struck. A shot rang out, hitting the ground near Torvik's feet. The impact kicked up a cloud of dust, forcing the Kralth to retreat into the canyon for cover. Keller watched as they entered the trap. He smiled grimly. Exactly where I want you. From his elevated position, Keller began firing, each shot forcing the Kralth deeper into the canyon. The narrow walls amplified the sound of his rifle, making it impossible for them to tell where the shots were coming from. The Kralth's final stand. Kraxus growled, his claws scraping against the canyon walls. We're pinned down. We have to fight back. He turned to Torvik. You take the left wall. Dravok, stay behind me. Torvik nodded and moved to the left, his weapon raised. But Keller was ready. A single shot echoed through the canyon, striking Torvik in the chest. The massive Kralth collapsed, his weapon falling from his claws. Dravok cried out in despair. Commander, we're not going to make it. Kraxus snarled. Quiet. I won't die like this. The predator's patience. The canyon was silent, save for the faint rustle of the wind and the soft drip of water from a nearby spring. The quiet felt oppressive, wrapping around Kraxus and Dravok like a shroud. Torvik's lifeless body lay crumpled against the canyon wall, a grim reminder of the human sniper's precision. Kraxus crouched low, his claws digging into the coarse ground. His mind raced. The human had outmaneuvered them at every turn, but he refused to admit defeat. "This ends here," he muttered under his breath. Dravok, pale and trembling from his earlier wound, leaned against the canyon wall. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Commander, he's everywhere. We can't win." Raxus snarled, silencing him. "The only way he wins is if we give up. I will not let this human write the story of my failure." Keller observes. From his perch high above the canyon, Keller watched the two remaining Kralth through his scope. He could see the fear etched into Dravok's face and the simmering rage in Raxus's eyes. The commander was still dangerous, but Keller could tell this confidence was fraying. Good, Keller thought. Fear made enemies predictable, and predictable enemies were easy to eliminate. Keller adjusted his position, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He wouldn't take the shot yet. Patience was key. Every second he waited was another second for the Kralth to unravel. A desperate plan. Kraxus studied the canyon walls, searching for any advantage. He spotted a narrow crevice to the left, a potential escape route, though it would leave them exposed. "Dravok," he said, his voice low but firm, "we're not going to sit here and wait to die. Follow my lead." Dravok hesitated, his eyes darting toward Torvik's body. "Commander, I don't think." Kraxus grabbed him by the shoulder, his claws digging into the younger soldier's armor. "Think about this. If you don't move, you die here. If you follow me, you might live. Do you understand?" Dravok swallowed hard and nodded. The human's trap. As the two Kralth moved toward the crevice, Keller tracked them through his scope. He noticed Kraxus' calculated movements and realized the commander was trying to find an escape route. "Clever," Keller muttered to himself. But he wasn't about to let them slip away. Keller reached into his pack and retrieved a second flash grenade. He lobbed it toward the crevice, timing the throw so it would detonate just as the Kralth reached the entrance. The explosion of light and sound was deafening in the confined space. Dravok stumbled backward, his hands clutching his head. Kraxus shielded his eyes and roared in frustration. Kraxus' fury. The commander's patience snapped. He turned toward the canyon wall, where Keller was likely hiding, and fired his weapon blindly, sending bolts of energy streaking into the rocks. "Come out and fight me, human," Kraxus bellowed. His voice echoed through the canyon, his anger raw and unrestrained. "You hide in the shadows because you're too weak to face me." Keller didn't flinch. He stayed low, letting Kraxus' rage burn itself out. The commander's blind firing only revealed his position further. Dravok's collapse. Dravok fell to his knees, his strength fading. His wound, though not fatal, was taking its toll. He looked up at Kraxus, his voice shaky. "Commander, I can't keep going." Kraxus glared at him, but his anger softened. Despite his frustration, he knew Dravok was at his limit. "Stay here," Kraxus growled. "I'll handle this." Dravok nodded weakly, slumping against the canyon wall. The standoff. Kraxus stepped into the open, his weapon raised. He scanned the canyon walls, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of movement. "I know you're watching me, human," he called out. "I know you think you've already won, but I'm not like the others. I won't die on my knees." Keller watched through his scope, his finger hovering over the trigger. He could take the shot now, end it all with a single pull. But something made him hesitate. Kraxus' defiance intrigued him. A test of wills. Kraxus lowered his weapon slightly, his claws flexing. "Tell me, human, why do you fight like this? Why do you play these games instead of facing me with honor?" Keller smirked, though no one could see it. He pressed a button on his comms, his voice projecting into the canyon. "Honor? Is that what you call invading our space and slaughtering our people?" Kraxus stiffened, his eyes narrowing. We did what we had to do to survive. So am I, Keller replied. His voice was calm, almost emotionless. The silence that followed was heavy, each side weighing their next move. The final shot. The canyon fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind. Craxus stood in the open, his claws twitching as he stared into the shadows above. His breath came in slow, measured intervals, his predator instincts battling against the fear clawing at the edges of his mind. Keller remained motionless, his rifle steady. Through the scope, he watched the Kralth commander's every move. He could see the tension in Craxus's body, the way his eyes flicked between the rocks, searching for a target that refused to be seen. This is it, Keller thought. The culmination of the hunt. A calculated approach. Craxus raised his voice, letting it echo through the canyon. I know you're there, human. You think you've won because you've taken my soldiers. But I'm not like them. I've faced death before, and I've survived every time. Keller didn't respond. He adjusted his aim, centering the crosshairs on Craxus's chest. One shot would end it, but something held him back. Craxus's words weren't just bravado. They carried a weight that gave Keller pause. This wasn't just a battle. It was a clash of wills, a final test of resolve. Dravok's plea. Behind Craxus, Dravok stirred. The younger Kralth was pale and weak, his wounds sapping his strength, but he managed to call out. Commander, please, we don't have to fight him. We can still find another way. Craxus turned his head slightly, his jaw tightening. There is no other way, Dravok. If we leave, he'll hunt us down. The only chance we have is to face him. Dravok's voice cracked with desperation. What if you're wrong? What if fighting him is exactly what he wants? The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of doubt. The hunter becomes the prey. Keller seized the moment of distraction. He moved silently, shifting to a new position on the opposite side of the canyon. The Kralth's focus remained on his previous location, unaware that the hunter had already moved. Craxus' claws flexed as he scanned the shadows. His instincts told him the human was near, but every time he thought he caught a glimpse, it vanished like a ghost. Enough. Craxus roared, raising his weapon. He fired into the darkness, the energy bolts ricocheting off the canyon walls. The shots echoed, masking Keller's subtle movements as he positioned himself for the final strike, the final confrontation. Keller's voice crackled through the canyon, amplified by his comms. You're predictable, Craxus. You rely on brute force and intimidation, but that won't save you. Craxus froze, his ears swiveling to pinpoint the sound. Then face me, he shouted. Face me like a warrior. Keller stepped into view, his silhouette outlined against the rocky terrain. His rifle was slung across his back, and in his hand, he held a combat knife. Craxus' eyes narrowed. So you finally show yourself. No rifle, no shadows, just you and me. Keller nodded slightly. You wanted a fight. Here it is. The duel. Craxus lunged, his claws slashing through the air with lethal precision. Keller sidestepped, his movements swift and calculated. The Kralth's strength was immense, but Keller had the advantage of speed and strategy. The two circled each other, their attacks and defenses like a deadly dance. Craxus swung again, his claws gouging deep into the rocky ground as Keller dodged. You're fast, human, Craxus growled, his voice laced with frustration. But speed won't save you forever. I don't need forever, Keller replied calmly. He feinted to the left, drawing Craxus into an overextended strike. In that split second, Keller moved in, his knife slashing across the Kralth's side. Craxus roared in pain but managed to spin and swipe at Keller, his claws grazing the human's arm. Keller winced but didn't falter. The breaking point. Blood dripped from both fighters, staining the ground beneath them. Craxus' breathing grew labored, his movements slower but no less dangerous. Keller kept his distance, waiting for the right moment. Dravok, watching from the sidelines, cried out. "Stop this, please." Praxis ignored him, his focus entirely on Keller. With a final surge of strength, he charged, his claws outstretched. Keller ducked low, driving his knife upward into Praxis's chest. The Krulth froze, his eyes wide with shock. "You fought well," Keller said quietly, stepping back as Praxis staggered. The commander fell to his knees, his breathing ragged. He looked up at Keller, his expression a mix of defiance and acceptance. "You were better." Praxis collapsed, his body going still. Aftermath. Dravok crawled forward, his eyes filled with grief. He looked up at Keller, who stood silently, his knife still in hand. "Are you going to kill me too?" Dravok asked, his voice trembling. Keller regarded him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows once more. Epilogue. The camera pans over the canyon, showing the aftermath of the battle. Keller's silhouette fades into the distance as Dravok kneels beside his fallen commander. A voiceover from Keller plays over the final scene. "War is never fair. It's not about honor or glory. It's about survival. And sometimes survival means becoming the thing they fear most." The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a sense of both closure and lingering unease.